I know that you mentioned that this was a special day for the church as far as its response to this ongoing conflict, right? With the consecration of not only Russia and Ukraine, but the entire world to Mary, which is, I guess, an indication of just how worried Catholic Church leaders are about the situation, and maybe, how little they know what more to do except for to do that, which is, it's valuable. So this marks a day in which the church is trying to like grapple with this situation. How do you feel about that?
I mean, I had to make my peace several years ago with like the fact that there's like an impending secular apocalypse happening at more or less any time. So I'm not as freaked out by the specter of nuclear war, or at least I've heard a lot of people say that we're closer to nuclear war than we've ever been since like the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Yeah. So, and I wasn't around for the Cuban Missile Crisis, or maybe I was an infant, or I was maybe like who knows? I could have been born, but I don't think I was quite born yet. But I grew up under the specter of, nuclear holocaust when I was a kid. Even in grade school, I remember distinctly in grade school that we were drilled on what to do in the case of a nuclear attack. And we actually, the teachers in grade school talked about nuclear winter in like 6th grade. I remember that distinctly. In 6th grade, we were talking about the effects of nuclear weapons. And so I've kind of lived my whole life under the shadow of the knowledge of the catastrophic effects that could occur if we really had a large-scale nuclear exchange. And so I hear what you're saying, and maybe you need to explain more, like why this doesn't affect you in the same way. But at the same time, if I would say we're closer to, or, it's still a very remote possibility, but we're closer to a nuclear war situation than we have been since the Second World War, when the United States the only use of nuclear weapons has been the United States used them in Japan. And even if it's a 10% chance, it strikes me as like just extremely troubling. And I haven't met anybody yet who has actually displayed the same level of concern. So it's almost as though, even though, Russia has more nuclear weapons than any other country, and the United States has probably the second most, of course, and then there are a bunch of other countries that have them, that, the possibility of anybody using them is so remote that we just don't need to worry about them, or they're in the background somehow. But in my mind, how can something like that countries like Russia and the United States have, how can that be in the background? So they're there, so they can be used. There's a possibility of their use. And I don't think it's a mistake to think about that when trying to decide, how to think about this conflict.
Sure. Well, from what I can tell, there's like 3 ways people that are in various kinds of denial, because that's what I hear you saying, that they're in denial about the threat that we're all under. I feel like in the one, you have this kind of like naive Pollyanna-ish, like everything will be fine. and I'm just a little atom in a wild world. So why worry about any of that? Which is, I think, where most people are. And like the truth of that is, what can any of us do? I mean, what is you worrying about it going to do? And then you have like technocrat nerds who are like, well, but yeah, we all have nukes, but that just lessens the possibility of them ever being used. And it's that whole deterrent idea.
Sure.
Um,
Sure.
so then you have that. And I guess that's to some degree true, even if it's like at the level of resource management, absolutely insane. But and then I would argue, I mean, I always go back to that Nietzsche quote about how, like, if you gaze into the abyss gazes into you. You know, I've had to accept that we are a profoundly, in secular terms, stupid, and in religious terms, sinful species. So at any point, things could go wildly off the rails. And even what we consider normal and right is still mitigated insanity. So, you know, I would argue we're living under a mild nuclear winter all the time with our stupidity / sinfulness.
Well,
Is why I can be more hard-hearted about it, I guess.
there's no way for me to, I don't feel like I can take that stance. Because if we had a large scale nuclear exchange, it would mean an incredible amount of environmental damage that could literally, like, not just kill lots of people, but change the environment such that we would have a hard time recovering as a species. Now, I mean, you're probably thinking, and I kind of agree with you, you know, we're already doing that to a certain extent by continuing to do all of the things we do to continue climate change.
Mm-hmm. Accelerationist capitalism, I would call it. But yeah.
Right. And is that what you're thinking of when you said a while back that basically you're kind of living in that state already?
Yeah, like I mean, I wouldn't say I'm fully there, but to me, the common sense is we just need to accept that by the end of the century, more people will be killed by wars and famine than last century. That's just where that is the trajectory of the course we're on.
Yeah.
And we're not going to do anything about that, at least until it's too late and there's a bill with a lot of interest due. And where I feel a certain amount of solace is I've struggled hard for a decade. Not that I'm like done or not implicated or whatever, but I've really tried. And at the end of this, I've realized how hard it is to even modestly change the life of the people around you, let alone the future waves of refugees from droughts and other kind of natural disasters.
Mm-hmm.
And that this stuff is more sure than a nuclear war.
You're right about that. I agree with that. We are for sure looking at that. And I mean, these things are starting to happen. And over the course of the next century, we're going to have a lot of famine, a lot of drought. We're going to have mass migrations. We're going to have like agricultural failures that are going to cause like widespread problems, and all that's going to create like huge political divisions and political conflict. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I agree with you, and I'm not discounting that, but for some reason it seems even more unacceptable that we're in this situation with nuclear weapons, because for a while now people have acted as though they don't exist because the Cold War supposedly ended. You know, now the fact that Russia and United States and several other countries in the world are armed to the teeth with nuclear weapons is not a problem, and we don't need to think about it because we don't have the Cold War anymore, or we don't need to think about it because it would be totally unthinkable for people to do this. Well, that last one is like out the window. It's obviously thinkable. Okay. And I mean, Russia has been saying that they'll do it. I don't know why we would doubt that they would do it when they've already, when we doubted that they were going to full scale invade Ukraine until they did it. Now, like we say to ourselves, well, people won't do irrational things, but they do that all the time. They do that all the time. I mean, our Russia has proved the whole theory of liberal peace wrong. Okay, because they have like a huge interest in keeping that oil flowing to Europe and being integrated into the global economy. And they're paying a huge price now for that, and probably will for the foreseeable future. But that hasn't stopped them. It didn't stop them in the first place, and it's not stopping them now. So, the whole assumption that people are rational is yet again being proven false. People want to say, well, there's only one irrational person, and that's the president of Russia.
But
right?
do smart people say that? I mean, I'm sure there are people that believe that, but like,
Who are smart people?
well, I mean, is that like in any way a respectable opinion?
Yes, it's the opinion of the New York Times, I think. It's the opinion of,
Well, that's why they're the failing New York Times.
yeah, I think for some political leaders, at least rhetorically, that's the opinion because it's popular to say. And I'm not pronouncing on Putin's like mental health, but the fact that so many people are talking about that as the main on media, like mainstream media, talking about his mental health as a main kind of instigator of the situation, shows that there's not enough of a grasp of how these things happen and how they work. So I guess I would say, yes, a lot of intelligent people, both in the media as well as in our, political leadership, rely too much on, it's just the mental health issues of an individual who's maybe been isolated too long because of COVID or I don't know what.
As if the president of Russia has been holed up in his mansion all alone, going crazy.
Yeah, that's the picture, right?
Right, but in a way, that's my point. If something like the New York Times, multi-million-dollar outfit, right? If that is what's being propounded from place, I mean, to me, there's a direct connection between the stupidity at that level, that you can have the New York Crimes putting out arguments like this. You can have nation states stockpiling thousands and thousands of nuclear warheads. You can have people totally oblivious to how bad climate change is going to be. To me, it's all just stacked on top of each other. It's all hazy where one of these things ends and the other begins.
Yeah. Yep. And the nuclear, go ahead.
Which is why, for me, normal everyday life is a traumatic emergency situation that everybody seems to be fine with. And yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of been the case for me as well, especially lately, but even before, it's like, what would it take to wake people up? The fact that the nuclear weapons exist, and this is what people don't want to admit, the fact that they exist, okay, and the fact that Russia has them makes Russia feel, or at least enough people in the leadership of that country feel as though they are important and they have certain rights and certain things that they ought to do, because they have that military power, and they do. And
Mhm.
they're being pushed back now, and that's both good and bad. Like, they are doing terrible, unacceptable things, obviously, in Ukraine from a moral perspective. There's no doubt. I mean, it's wrong.
Sure.
It's just morally wrong. On the other hand,
Which is what wars always are.
they
I mean,
always are. Right, right. And always have been. When
right. Theories of just war to the contrary.
Mhm.
They're not good to the innocent people in the way, even if the war itself is justified.
Right, right. They never are. And, there's been a level of kind of dismay regarding this situation that is in itself kind of alarming, as though people don't understand this is what war does.
Sure. And what America, in less obvious ways, and sometimes in more obvious ways, does all the time.
Yeah, yeah. America perhaps makes a bigger deal over messaging, and I don't even know, like, but definitely messaging when it comes to trying to uh, show that they're making that just war distinction between combatants and non-combatants. And the Russians seem to have kind of doubled down on their disregard for even that messaging, and they've definitely been targeting civilians. But it's not as though the United States and other powerful countries haven't basically also, though the language may be different in how it's characterized, killed many, many innocent civilians.
Mhm.
That's not a moral equivalency argument. It's just an acknowledgement that the surprise and dismay that's directed at this war is maybe a little bit misplaced. And I don't know. Like, I don't know
Sure.
what.
And I think it's a lot of, I think what a lot of people are doing, whether they know it or not, is it's not so much that they care about the Ukrainian people, because how many people had given any thought to the Ukrainian people before now?
Right.
It's another example of the old joke that wars happen so Americans can learn about history, or learn about geography, excuse me. It's more that they're grieving the fact that we live in a world where countries can try and take over other countries by violence, and especially countries that we don't like might be able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot of that's going on, and it's more people wailing their loss of innocence more than true philanthropy for Ukrainians. Maybe I'm a cynical bastard, but
Well, we haven't done the same mourning for a lot of other people around the world that have
sure.
faced just wholly disastrous situations of the same magnitude. So, I mean, we need to have.
And here again, where
people.
I'm cynical, I got like paying attention to the world starting on 9/11, and then afterwards, we got a pretty heavy dose of that. Now we had an ideology to explain to us why this was all right and why it was all going to work out well.
Mm-hmm.
That I would argue, if you've been paying attention, has not borne out.
No, it is not.
Mm-hmm. But I think you saw a similar thing last year. All of a sudden, Americans cared deeply about Afghanistan and how we were handling it. But had they thought about it a year before? And have they thought about it this year?
This is what bothers me. I wouldn't say the most, but it bothers me a lot, which is that Americans or other people say they care deeply about things that they don't know anything about, or that they just tapped into because they've watched the news and they see images and pictures, and suddenly they're deeply invested at an emotional level, supposedly, and they're all very convicted, and they have sympathy. And I'm not saying that, like, that sympathy isn't warranted. Anybody who's being treated like, attacked like the Ukrainians ought to receive sympathy. But there's a weird sort of like drama in the American consciousness where it's all kind of just entertainment to a certain extent, or it's just spectatorship. Maybe that would be a better word. And, people live vicariously through that. And it creates this sort of weird unreality where no, like nuclear war, a threat to us, that could never happen. That's not even on the radar screen. We don't need to even think about that. We just need to get like involved in the latest drama. And I swear to God, it seems like if something else replaced that next week, people would forget about it.
Sure. And that's part of what it means to live in the society of the spectacle.
Yeah. That's what it feels like. It's like, a sort of detachment from the physical reality. The physical reality is that your neighborhood could be destroyed. Like what's happening to the Ukrainians now could also be happening to you. There's no absolute reason why conflict can't come to you. And that's the threat of this situation, which is why, regardless of the fact that the aggression was instigated by Russia, and there's a whole context for that that does involve some aggression on the part of NATO over time. Okay. But regardless of that, and assigning blame for the initial aggression, the fact that that people are so bellicose, and so like intransigent as far as wanting to talk and wanting to negotiate. To me, it reveals like a lack of realism about the consequences, as though nothing can touch you. So you can just hold your firm ground on your positions. This is not a way to end conflict.
Sure. Well, and I think that's probably the underlying thing when I made an argument for like there's three obvious ways to be in various denials about nuclear winter. Two of those are either it's going to be fine, or well, basically they boil down to it's not happen, so I don't need to worry about it.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're saying, there will be no negative consequences to me.
Right. So I can worry about it the way I worry about like, polar bears stranded on an iceberg, in like, the North Pole. But it's like a sort of emotional, pull, but it's not like I'm freaking out because I know, but it's a fantasy. This like feeling of safety is a fantasy. We all need to like sober up a bit here.
Yeah, but here's where I mean, you could make like a sort of social material argument and explain that like, well, so far we all pretty much have been fine. We meaning just Americans, and especially Americans in the middle class and up. After 9/11, there weren't a spate of a whole bunch of major terrorist attacks, just as one example.
Right. And that is partly due to chance and partly due to like our huge amount of power and capability. Mm-hmm. It is.
Right. So, and put another way, when you're cosseted and privileged, you probably will be fine.
Right. You will probably be fine until you're not, because everything comes to an end eventually. Mm-hmm. Everything comes to an end. There is no eternal empire. And nuclear weapons, more than anything else, can basically breach that in a big hurry. Mm-hmm. And I don't feel like I want to take that chance. And I'm not sure why. It's unnerving how little people seem to care about it. But it is that and nuclear, or that and biological weapons. Those two things are weapons. They're threats that can affect us very quickly. And I mean, in the case of nuclear, all we can do is shoot back. That's not going to like save us. Or we do have missile defense, so we may have, who knows, maybe there's calculations like that going on. But I just I don't understand why people are quite so sanguine about the situation. And I probably never will. And I don't want to just attribute it to my generation, because damn it, they're still there. It's not like, oh, it's just because I lived through the, like the sort of like trauma of growing up under this. No, they're still there. There's a lot more there. And the idea that people are never going to use them seems ridiculous to me.